We'll start this hour too with breaking news because the US Senate Intelligence Committee has sent a letter to Julian Assange asking him to testify on alleged Russian meddling in America's 2016 presidential election. Well, let's get more details now from Anastasia Chalkner, who's following the story for us from London. Anastasia, good afternoon to you. Just go through them. What exactly is in this document?
Well, Andrew, indeed, the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee has sent a letter to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where, as we all know, the WikiLeaks publisher has been holed up for the last 6 years. This letter is addressed to Julian Assange, basically calling upon him to testify in what is being described as a closed interview at a mutually convenient time and location. Now, given we all understand Julian Assange has made it clear he has no plans to be leaving that embassy anytime soon out of his own free will, potentially this is going to be some kind of question and answer session that is probably going to be taking place via some kind of web link. Now, to be clear, the committee has clarified that the topic of this testimony would be Russian interference in the U.S. elections of 2016. And we have seen the WikiLeaks or Julian Assange's legal team already react to this letter, saying they would be open to this kind of testimony, but it must conform to a high ethical standard. So we'll be keeping an eye on when exactly this happens and whether or not some kind of information comes out of what is discussed.
Sure. Why does the US believe that Assange should be central then to their investigation into those alleged actions by Moscow?
Well, this seems to fall into this U.S.-led narrative that has been circulating widely, especially in mainstream media, basically saying that Russia had something to do with the U.S. elections when Donald Trump came to power, and that Julian Assange had a part to play in that. Because as we know, of course, just recently, it's been said that 11 Russian intelligence officers had hacked into DNC servers. They had taken some sensitive information, allegedly passed it to Julian Assange, who later published that information. And despite Julian Assange himself having denied any of this countless times in numerous appearances, it seems this is still a prevalent understanding in Washington, so that's why they want to talk to him about it. But Julian Assange has made his position clear a handful of times.
Our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party. This is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked. So the actor that they've tried to bring in is the Russian intelligence services. Hillary Clinton stated multiple times, falsely, that 17 US intelligence agencies had assessed that Russia was the source of our publications. Okay, that's false.
Well, so now with WikiLeaks legal team saying Assange would not be against talking to them, we might be able to get some more information in terms of Assange setting the record straight when it comes to the investigation being carried out by this U.S. Intelligence Senate Committee.
OK, thanks, Anastasia Chalkner there for us in London. Well, let's get the views now of Patrick Henningsen. He's from the 21stCenturyWire.com, and he's waiting for us right now. Patrick, thanks for your time today. What do you make of this, then? Why do you think senators are still calling for Assange to testify over these claims of Russian meddling, even though he's repeatedly denied any links to the Kremlin?
Yeah, it is kind of puzzling why they would want Julian Assange to testify in these hearings. His previous statements all pretty much refute the official story in the United States establishment, in the U.S. media and the Democratic establishment. So there's two problems. One of the main problems that they have, the United States, if they have Assange testify, is that he may possibly give information that would destroy the sort of mainline conspiracy theory that the Russians hacked the DNC servers and they stole the emails and handed them to WikiLeaks. That's the whole Russiagate case more or less hinges on that sort of conspiracy theory. So if Julian Assange comes and testifies and destroys that narrative, I don't know where that's going to lead. The current U.S. political polarization is completely wed to that narrative. So is this maybe some other political forces at play in the United States? Are there moves being made possibly to, put the cap on this whole Russiagate thing that's been going now for 2 years? It's difficult to say.
It is. I mean, just on that point too, we keep hearing that Russia's behind this, but in fact, former US intelligence officials do contend, don't they, that the DNC hack was an inside job. It wasn't Russia.
Sure. Julian Assange himself alluded to this point a number of times over the last 2 years, especially in the immediate aftermath of that incident as well. So I think it would be very enlightening if he did testify. I think it would be fantastic on many levels. If it happened before the midterms, it could have some kind of effect, perhaps, on the results. But then if it doesn't go one party's way, they might blame Julian Assange for meddling in the U.S. midterm elections. Who knows, or the Russians by extension. But if it's done by remote link, then there's the issue of his safety exiting the embassy. That's not going to be a big issue, although that's on the table. Discussions are happening now. His lawyers are in talks with the Ecuadorian embassy, and the Ecuadorian embassy is guaranteeing his safety. If he is released, they want the British authorities to guarantee his safety. So there is some bargaining going on between Assange's camp, Ecuador, the UK, and the United States. There's a lot of leverage here, especially on Julian Assange's side. So there are deals to be made.
Sure. Would you anticipate then that Assange would agree to testify? I mean, do you see it's in his interests?
I think it is absolutely in his interest. I think he wants to testify. He's stated in previous occasions that he's willing to testify, provided that the interactions and it meets a high ethical standard. That might be a problem, though, in the United States, because they seem to be having issues with anything of a high ethical standard at the moment in Washington. So that's a slightly bit dicey there. But if he is ejected, or he does leave the embassy and he does so with some level of immunity, that could also be something to look for in the future, that he would step out with some level of immunity in the agreement that he might testify on another round, perhaps, or another legal proceeding, or another hearing. It's difficult to say, or another round of this current hearing, which this doesn't seem to be like it's going to finish anytime soon. We're now in our second year, but I think they'll want to wring this Russiagate thing out at least until after the midterms.
Sure. Before we go, Patrick, we should remind people that there are plenty in the US that do believe Russia was up to no good during these presidential elections. In fact, just last week, heads of the US intelligence and security came up with a joint statement. We can listen to that now.
Is in the crosshairs.
Campaign by Russia to try to weaken and divide the United States.
This threat is not going away.
To prevent foreign interference in our elections.
To prevent Russian and other foreign influence.
The Russians try to hack into and steal information from candidates and government officials alike.
Cyber attacks against voting infrastructure, along with computer intrusions.
Malicious cyber actors.
Targeting elected officials.
It goes beyond the elections. It goes to Russia's intent to undermine our democratic values.
Lots of accusations, but again, no hard evidence is presented. Are we going to see anytime soon, do you think?
No, we're not going to see any, because if there was any hard evidence, I guarantee you it would have been on the table before the election, or at least in the weeks or months in the run-up immediately to the election. Because if they had evidence, it would have absolutely, killed the Donald Trump campaign in its tracks. So it would have come out. There is no evidence. We would have seen it by now. And if you want any, if there's any argument that this isn't a partisan witch hunt, just look at the 10 Democratic senators who demanded that Julian Assange's asylum be revoked in violation of international law. All 10 of them are Democrats. So this is completely a partisan witch hunt. It's been so from the start. And the Democratic Party, rather than having a come to Jesus moment and a moment of self-introspection and see what they did wrong in one of the worst presidential campaigns in history, instead they immediately blamed Russia and covered up the meddling that was being done by the Hillary Clinton camp with the DNC, derailing the Sanders campaign and the Obama White House's role in that as well. So I think that cover-up continues continues to this day. So they really need to hold this into place as long as possible, at least till after these midterm elections, maybe until 2020. But that would be a disaster for their party.
OK, Patrick, look, we're going to have to leave it there, but good to talk to you. That's Patrick Henningsen from 21stCenturyWire.com. Thank you. Well, as we were hearing, for 6 years now, the WikiLeaks chief has been stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy in London over fears he will be extradited to the US if he leaves the building. Some American politicians have even called to assassinate him. Here's a recap why his revelations have angered Washington.